Yeah. So when I was a teenager and began taking riding lessons, we learned, you half hold when you do a down transition or before a corner or before a new movement and so on. But it was never really quite explained what the half hold is supposed to accomplish or how you do it or when you do it, in terms of footfalls and so on. And so that's something I had to piece together from the old literature from the 19th century, essentially. The old masters have useful information, but it's kind of scattered. So you have to pull it together.
Yeah, I would actually love to ask all of you, if you could chime in. Do you know what the half halt is, or is it still kind of a mystery for you? And if you know what it is, where did you learn it from? From an instructor or from reading about it somewhere, or video, or you can't remember? That's valid. I remember where I had heard the term and thought I was doing it, but where I really got clear from it was by reading Gustav Steinbrecht. Yeah.
He's not even the most explicit one.
No, but that's what I'm sure there are, but that's what that's where I got the pieces that made sense to me. But then I'm a little weird. Steinbrecht spoke to my soul. I loved reading Steinbrecht. Yeah, weirdo. Yeah. Dressage weirdo, right? Yeah. I think we have a bunch of those here, though.
Yeah. So in Montgomery, it says often coaches wrongly seem to assume rider knows, student knows how to half halt and which one to use. It's very true. It's often assumed everybody knows a half halt, right? So nobody explains it. And then, but I think when you ask the teacher, can you explain that, a lot of them don't quite know, what to say, I think.
Anne is an instructor herself. And maybe you could also chime in, how many people come to you, dressage riders, that they've been riding a while, but they still don't really know what the half halt really is that well. And any of you other professionals that are watching, you have a slightly different perspective because you have to teach this a lot. Yeah. So
Bronwyn says confused and all the different translations of this from different people. Yeah. And Vivian Dixon says read about it but didn't recognize it until I felt it. And Loving says read about it in Jane Savoy's book.
Jane Savoy, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So, anybody on Zoom?
Yeah, Jeanette says, I learned it from reading and online trainings. Instructors never explained it to me. And Georgina, I think, says, I know just the rain half halt, but not even very much about it or what it does. Perfect. Yeah, we're going to talk about that today.
Oh, Sandy Marks also, 3 a.m.
It's in the PDF too, but we're going to go into more in depth and we'll answer your questions about it too. I'd also love to hear those of you that are confused about it, that don't really know, where does that leave you feeling? Like embarrassed or, frustrated or I would love to know kind of where did this leaves you feeling when you don't have this information, there's this gap and you're maybe afraid to ask. Or you ask and you get a really short answer that still doesn't clarify things at all for you. I'd like to hear. If you don't mind sharing, I'd be interested to hear where this leaves you feeling.
Yeah, so there are a couple more comments. Mandy Jones is new of half halt, but only learned properly from you. Christina Krikovic said, I've learned about it from your courses, but never enough learning about half halts.
Yeah, I know. You can always learn more, right?
Bronwyn says, just don't try to do it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's give you some tools, okay?
Marine House says, I usually slow my horse down when I half halt. I know this is wrong, but I haven't got it right yet. It's not necessarily wrong. We'll get to that.
Yeah, it's one of the aspects of a half halt, but not the only one.
Hannah Karin Vikre says it's almost embarrassing to say that I'm not able to say what half halt is. So wait, excited.
Thank you for being brave enough to say that out loud. Thank you.
You're not alone, probably in the majority actually. It's often it's one of those dressage isms, right, that everybody throws around, half halt, but and maybe some people have a certain feel in their body.
If you just half halt, the horse will have better balance. And I remember hearing that.
Yeah, and it could be that some people have a certain feeling in their body that they associate with it, and that might be correct or may not be, and then they may be able to half-halt effectively. But then putting that into words is a different story, especially if you don't have like a systematic theoretical framework that can explain it, you know, put it into words.
So Sharon Bridgman says it depends. Academic equitation is different to other sources. Okay. Georgina says Thomas says to half halt into the hind leg, and so I try to do that, but still, oops, it moved. Hold on just a minute. But still not sure what I'm achieving with it. Okay, great. That's super, super. So that we can explain that. I need to know where your questions are around this. So Sharon says, now half halt is something I do within my body, rebalance my weight up and back. Georgina says, also, aren't there different half halts using the body? And Maxine says, I'm starting to understand the half halt, but until recently I was confused and felt I was the only one who didn't understand. Yeah, yeah, the thing is, you're not the only one. You're not.
And Hannah B says, I always thought I knew, but realized recently that I don't do them really other than to slow down. I try to use them more now and think of the definition by Eckhart Miners, who says it's a drawing in of the navel. Only if I feel that doesn't do the job, I would close my hands as well. I'm not sure I'm doing it right, though.
Okay.
And then Mandy Jones says it makes you feel stupid and not a good writer when you don't know things, so many conflicting views and ways, you're not sure which one is the correct way.
Yep.
Yeah. Roberta Fenning-Gotches says, I understand it as bringing the horse onto the hind legs. Kathy Gallman says, I'd like to know if a half halt should be done by 2 reins only, or if you can use 1 rein separately.
Good question.
And whole half.
Okay, and so Dr. N. Sandra says, bring horse to attention to reestablish balance. Now, how is the question? Rein aids married to body aids within the leg rhythm movements. It's in a moment of short breath. And Georgina says, I have to add, though, that I have learned so much from you two. Well, thank you. Thank you. And hopefully we continue. Hopefully today will, you know, shed a little bit more light on that for you.
Right. Yeah. So I always like to start with the purpose of the half halt. Like when I explain it, like what are you trying to accomplish, right? And from the theoretical, systematic point of view, the half halt is supposed to flex the joints of the hind leg more that's on the ground at that moment.
Why?
Right?
No,
what do you mean why?
No, I think they would like to know why. Why do we want to do this?
I'll get to that. So, you know, in the movement of the hind leg, you know, the hind leg lifts off, it reaches forward, it touches down, and then the body travels across it, and, you know, hind leg lifts off again. And when the hind leg is on the ground, there is a moment where it's in front of the vertical, and then it has to start supporting the weight. That's the moment where the hind leg joints flex more. And as the body travels across it, there comes a moment when the hind leg is vertical, and then the joints start to open, to extend again, and the hind leg starts pushing, right? So when you half halt, you essentially enhance that supporting, carrying, flexing phase of the hind leg. You try to make that a little bigger, right? So that the horse supports the weight for longer, maybe, or it supports a larger share of the weight, right? Takes on a larger share of the weight. And based on that primary, you know, function or purpose, you can then utilize the half halt to, you know, accomplish different things. Like you can half halt in such a way that the carrying, flexing phase becomes longer, right? In other words, the hind leg stays in that flexion phase a little longer.
Which helps to facilitate a shift of balance.
Yeah, and it slows the tempo down. So slowing the tempo down is not necessarily wrong, right? You can do that. You could also half halt in such a way that, yes, the hind legs flex their joints like a spring, and afterwards they, when they extend, when the joints extend, the horse bounces the body mass in a more vertical direction rather than in a more horizontal direction, which would create shorter strides. So you can use half-halts to slow the tempo down. If your horse is rushing, you can use it to shorten the strides. Now you can use it to transfer weight off the front legs more towards the hind legs. So you feel like you're sitting more on the hind legs.
Maybe right? We should actually really briefly, assuming they understand that why we want to do this, why we want to shift the weight back.
It improves the balance. It improves the lightness of the horse, right? The mobility.
Because for those that don't know, now we have a lot of more advanced people here too, but for those of you watching and maybe not speaking of, one of the core things that we want to do is bring in dressage is gradually through the training, bring the weight further and further back towards the hind legs. And this is how why the movements in dressage, right, get gradually more difficult. It's require more collection. Collection is how much weight the haunches carry. Now, it also preserves the soundness of the horse. The more you can take the weight off of the front legs, because the front legs are not made to carry the weight so well. You know, they can't bend, the joints don't bend when they take on the weight. Whereas the hind legs, they compress and bend.
And if you have more weight on the hind legs flex more under the weight, you create more movement options. So you can ride tighter turns, you can do more lateral movements, you know, the half pass and the renvers. If you have the weight more on the forehand, if the hind leg joints stay more extended, you know, they push more, then you can go straight on, you know, straight lines or big circles and very little else, right? In order to ride any, you know, more sophisticated, more complicated patterns, or to ride any more advanced movements, the hind legs have to fold under the body mass more, and that's something that you can, you know, create through half-halts, right? So the purpose is to create more flexion, and then that flexion gives you better balance. It gives you greater agility.
Yes. More expression to the gaits.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, and so from that description and the function, you can already see that there is a certain moment in the footfall sequence where the half-halt can go through and be executed by the horse, right? So the horse can only sit and flex the joints of the hind legs more in that period between touching down with the hind leg and passing the vertical. So only when the joints of the hind leg flex because of the natural sort of biomechanical, you know, evolution of the stride, only in that moment can your half-halt go through. If you try to give a half-halt when the hind leg is already pushing and extending the joints, then your aid would tell the hind leg fold, you know, flex your joints, but the laws of physics dictate that the joints have to extend, and then it creates a conflict, right? It's a little bit like a head-on collision between the hind leg and your aid. So that's why it's important that you can learn to feel when the hind leg touches down, because that moment when the hind leg touches down is the window in which your aid has a chance of going through, right? And you can feel that in your seat bone, because it's like a little driving over a speed bump, right? When the hind leg touches down, the horse's hip comes up a little, but your body is in a downward movement from, you know, especially in the trot, you feel it because there's a little bit bigger up and down movement, but you feel it in the walk also to a smaller extent. And you can feel it in your fingers. If you have a connected seat, your elbows are connected to your body, then you feel the hind leg swinging forward and touching down, right? It's a very small, very light, like a feeling like when you put your fingers on an artery, on a pulse. It's like that light, you know, you feel it in your fingers. And that every time you feel that little bump under a seat bone, or you feel that little you know, pulse in your fingers, it's sort of the indication by the horse that this is the moment where you could apply a half-halt if you need one, right? Of course, you don't do this every stride.
And it goes without saying that you can't influence both hind legs at the same time unless you're doing a terre-terre or misere, right? Because the hind legs are not both simultaneously touching down and taking on the weight at the same time. So you're not shifting the weight into both hind legs at the same time.
Right.
You're shifting the weight into one at a time.
Yeah, only the one that's on the ground and carrying
underneath the
weight,
center of gravity.
right? So it's logical in a way.
Well, right? I think this needs to be explained because, yeah, it's logical to you because you've been working with this for so many years, teaching this and writing for so many years.
Yeah, so, and then in terms of technique, like how, you know, which part of your body are you using? There are a number of options actually in which you can do it. So if the purpose is to compress the joints of the hind legs, you could do it by just using your own body weight and emphasizing the downward movement, you know, of the natural, you know, there's a natural up and down movement. If you're thinking of the trot, you can enhance the downward movement, use gravity, let your body sink more, right? And use your pelvic floor maybe in that moment, or even if you have a horse with a strong back, you can use your seat bone a little bit on the side where the hind leg is down and let the horse feel that more. Somebody had actually posted a description that was pretty good here, Daria. It's feeling of thinking, it's sitting deep in the saddle, stopping my own body energy, or almost like grabbing a horse's attention in preparation. You can do that. You can feel like I'm arresting my body movement. I'm like stopping in time for a split second, right? That creates that weight transfer of your own body more into the hind leg, and it holds the foot on the ground a little bit more. Now there are horses that are a little sensitive in the back, and if you try to sit deeper or sit heavier, they drop their back and invert, and they don't like it, right? So another option you have is to apply a little pressure to the stirrup with your toes, you know, and that channels your body weight through that foot and onward into the ground, right? Through the horse's leg and into the ground. And that is a good way also of asking the hind leg to stay on the ground longer. It's a good way to slow the tempo down if you need to. If you press the stirrup a little longer, but you can also
stirrup aid.
You can press the stirrup for a shorter moment, which essentially makes the horse press down into the footing with his own foot and then push himself up out of it. So that can create more energy, actually, just like, you know, when you compress a spring, it wants to go back to its original shape. And if you do it briefly, quickly, and in the right rhythm, then it bounces back a little bigger every time. Or if you dribble a ball, bounce it into the ground, it will bounce higher if you do it just in the right rhythm, you know. And you can do the same thing essentially through half-halts and also through the stirrup pressure, so that the horse leaves a slightly deeper imprint on the ground with his foot, and then as he hugs the ground and then presses against the ground, he can bounce himself out of the footing higher. So that's a way of creating more elasticity.
Yeah, especially useful for horses that are sensitive in the back.
Yeah.
But I wanted to also mention another thing you can do with horses that are sensitive in the back that don't like it when you sit a little heavier or deeper into the horse. You can actually almost do the opposite, not standing in the stirrup, but sit taller for a moment. It's like you're stretching your whole body upward. And what this does is it activates the pelvic floor muscles, and this creates a broadening effect on the horse's back. So it's a weight aid applied slightly differently, and this can have a good effect on horses too. So it's worth experimenting with your horse to find exactly how your horse likes the seat portion of the half halt. Now there's a rein portion and a seat portion always.
Yeah, there's
Or I should say there's always a seat portion. The rein portion can be added in, but you can half halt with just the seat too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's this variety of ways in which you can do it. So then the next option you have is to use one of the reins. That is essentially it brings the weight of the horse's head and neck into the game, right? And adds it to your body weight, right? You can half-halt. I mean, the half-halt is essentially a weight aid. You know, you could look at it as a weight aid. You know, use your body weight to push the hind leg into the ground.
You're transferring weight always from someplace to someplace else.
Right. And if you just use your seat and the stirrup, then you would be using your own body weight only. If you add a rein pressure, you're adding the weight of the horse's head and neck to your own body weight, right? And so it makes the half-halt maybe a little more powerful or more
stronger,
intense,
more effective.
Right? So, and
it also teaches the horse that doesn't know about the seat half-halt yet, that doesn't understand it. It can help to teach the horse to listen to the seat.
Yeah. And the rein portion of the half-halt only works if you have a good connection from your core, from your pelvis to the elbow, right? Otherwise the horse will fight against it.
It gets stuck in just the arms and the hands.
Right. Yeah, if it's just an arm, aid, hand aid, then the horse will fight it.
Then it's just fiddling.
It won't go through. Yeah. But if it's
or pulling,
if your arm is connected to your body, then your body weight and it feels like your pelvic floor really brings the half-halt through, and then your rein aid is just an add-on. It just adds a little bit more weight to your own body weight. And so you can use a half-halt with the rein on the same side, right? So if you half-halt into the outside hind leg, you could use a little stirrup pressure on the outside stirrup, and the outside hind is on the ground, and you could use the outside rein at the same time. That's sort of a standard scenario, right? If you feel like, now I'm half-halting with my outside rein and the horse's shoulders are drifting to the inside, trying to avoid the half-halt and trying to unload the outside hind, right? Then you could use the inside rein instead and take the weight of the inside shoulder, transfer that to the outside hind, and frame it so that it cannot leave its line of travel, right? And the third option, would be to use, for example, a stirrup pressure in both reins, but that's a very strong aid that I only would use in certain situations like halting, the horse, doing a down transition to the halt, and then as the last moment, the last half-halt of the three, we do our down transitions.
Or if you really want a strong slow down, a strong aid at that moment, it's very powerful.
Yeah, but I would use it relatively rarely.
Yeah,
I would use one
certainly not
rein,
every time,
typically.
every half-halt.
Yeah, exactly.
I certainly wouldn't either.
Yeah. And
because you're borrowing the leverage of both sides of the horse's neck, so it's triply powerful. It's not just the seat, it's not just one rein, it's both reins into the hind leg.
Yeah, and so now, so you have three components at least that you can use. Right? You have your pelvic floor, your stirrup, and your rein, and now you can combine them and see what works best for your horse. Right? You could do stirrup and seat bone or pelvic floor. You can use stirrup and rein. You could use rein and pelvic floor without stirrup. And you will find when you try these options, you will find that some of these options work better than others. Right? Some of them will go through well, and others will get stuck, or the horse will block them somewhere in the body.
And this can depend on various factors. It can depend on the horse. It can depend on your body. It can depend on where the horse is in the training, the horse's previous experience, so on. Yeah.
Exactly.
And potentially the tack you're using too. Yeah. There's, certain saddles that sometimes don't make the seat aid go through quite as well, or certain stirrups that make the stirrup aid not go through quite as well. And, if you're not riding with a bit, then, that rein half-halt, unless you're using a Cadmos instead, also doesn't have quite the same effect. Now, you can argue that you can still half-halt with a side pull or a hackamore or these other things too. It just modifies the effect a little bit. Yeah. But, use what you have. By all means, use what you have. Work from there.
And another thing that can work well for some horses is if you hug them with both legs, like basically from your hip down to the ankle, close your legs and hold them closed while you're half-halting.
This is where a huge point of confusion for a lot of people, because for years I had heard lots of instructors, many instructors, particularly in the USDF, explain that the half-halt is both legs, you close both legs, meaning you drive with both legs, and you use both reins at the same time, and that's your half-halt. And I was just like, whoa, that is so way overkill. You can ride so much more subtly than that. But I think now, many years later, I understand that this is the closing of the thighs, which is not necessarily the driving aid.
It's not a driving aid. It's like a
Yeah.
whole. It's almost like you
hugging aid.
Yeah, it's almost like you expand your seat. That it includes now your entire leg, and by hugging and holding with your leg, you can stop your pelvis from moving. It's then it's like your whole body stops the horse.
It's like plugging your seat into the horse a little bit more at that moment. So it's like this really makes the aid come through. It centers your pelvis on the horse. And it's not something, you don't ride with the thighs like this all the time. You don't, you know, and you want to differentiate. It's different than the driving aid for the horse.
Yeah, so it's it's another tool you can use. You don't have to, but you can. It's good to have different options because, you know, you may ride a horse and you give the half halts the way you always give them and they don't go through and the horse ignores them, fights against them, whatever, right? So then it's good to have other tools that try it a different way, like ask the same question in a different way, right? With a different part of the body, for example. And then you may find that, you know, there's an alternative way that the horse understands and accepts, and there's much less resistance to the half halt, right? So it's fascinating to experiment with these things and with these different options, you know, and find whatever works best for you and your horse. You may find that some of these combinations are easier for you or feel more natural to you, and others may feel weird or awkward and you don't want to do it that way. So find something that you're comfortable with and something that the horse understands and that he can execute. So the horse knows what you want, he does it, right? And another important aspect actually is that you have a clear mental picture of what you want. It's like, do I want to slow down? Do I want to shorten the strides? Do I want to make the horse sit more? Right?
Because I wanted to add something to what you were saying before, and I can't get a word in edgewise. I have to speak over you if I want to talk.
Okay.
I wanted to, about this experimentation, that, you know, horses are not robots. They're not cars. You know, they are beings that have their own way of interpreting too. And so you can't apply a standard formula to every single horse. I know people want this. I know, I get it. I understand, but it's not the way it is. It's not the way horses are. There are general principles that you can apply that work, that apply, but this is why we like to really encourage experimentation, because then you're going to find, instead of trying to apply somebody else's formula that works for their horse onto your horse that may work or might not, or might work part way, you know, to give you the elements that you can experiment with and find the way your horse needs you to ride, so that you find the best way for you and your horse. And so it's not, there's no standard absolute recipe, right? Like when making cookies, okay? I have to make chocolate chip cookies tomorrow for my daughter's kindergarten. And so, you know, I always follow the same recipe. I don't alter it ever, because then they turn out tasting awful, okay? But if I follow the same recipe, it always works. But that's cookies. Writing is not that way, unfortunately. You need to really understand the elements and be able to work within them. And the only way you get there is by experimenting. And so many writers are afraid to experiment. I wanted to go off on this tangent because I think it's so important to the half halt. It's so important to cultivating this mindset that it's okay to play. It's okay to experiment. This is where you get to really own the material. You get to really understand it. Instead of doing something that somebody else tells you in your ear to do every stride, this is great, because then you can learn to ride it. Your instructor telling you in your ear to ride, you know, this and this and this, that's great because you get to feel it. But you might not really know how to recreate that. You only learn how to recreate it by playing with the elements, experimenting with them thoughtfully, mindfully, and conscientiously, you know, caring for the outcome, caring for the horse, you know, not just, you know, brutally trying this and that. It makes no sense. No, use your intuition, use your logic, use your cultivate your sense of trying to understand where the horse is coming from, what the horse is feeling, what the horse is thinking. Because the more you do that, the more feedback you're going to get, the better feedback you're going to get. And you're going to learn just the right half halt for your horse. Sorry, go on.
Yeah,
I had to get my word in.
Equestrian Fundamentals says, yes, they're afraid because they may break the horse, which is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
It's very true. The teachers, I mean, when I was young too, our teachers tended to cultivate this fear of making mistakes because, you're going to ruin the horse forever.
And you don't know anything, so you do exactly what I say and nothing else. I remember being told this.
But the thing is really, you have nothing to lose. I mean, either it works or it doesn't, right? You can try one way of asking for the half halt. The horse will either let it go through or he won't, right? And then
you're going to learn something either way.
If you're not happy with the result, try a different way, right? And if none of these ways work, then maybe the horse needs to just become more supple and more through and more accepting of the aids.
That gives you the catalyst for another wonderful question. Why did it not go through? What's going on? What else can I look at? Asking good questions like this gives you better quality answers.
Exactly. So, and then, I've tried all kinds of variations of the half halt because the thing is, you have a way of doing things and it probably works pretty well. But then in the back of my mind, I often have this sort of nagging thought, well, what if there is an even better way? Even if this works, maybe if there's something that works more efficiently with less strength, less effort, less whatever, right? So I try different things. And then sometimes you discover something, oh yeah, that's even better than what I used to do. Or, no, I shouldn't have done that. That was not a good idea.
Or it created this effect, and I'm not sure if this is better or not, but that's interesting. And so, I used to keep a journal where I would make these notes and my thoughts from each ride. I don't really do that anymore, but I recommend it highly. It's really useful. You can go back and compare your notes. Well, I tried this day, and I tried this day, and I tried this day, and these 2 days yielded the best results. What if I take those 2 days and experiment with that and take that further? And especially if you're riding multiple horses, that can be really helpful to keep notes. And along the way in our riding journey, different teachers gave us different things to try. They provided their own formulas of what worked, and we worked within each of those models and played with the elements. And we invite you to do the same.
Exactly. Research it, make it your own, experiment with it. It's a way of communicating with the horse. Really, you have to find a way to get your point across so the horse understands
it's a dialogue.
What you want to do, and then you have to apply the aid in such a way that you're not at the same time preventing the horse from doing it. Right? Sometimes it happens that riders send out conflicting messages. That would be not a good idea. But if you're very clear in your mind and essentially, it revolves around the natural footfall pattern of the horse. You just try to emphasize a certain aspect. Like, for example, in a very primitive way, you could not stop your horse with your hands by just hauling on the reins, right? The horse is stronger than you, he's heavier than you. That's not going to work. But you can utilize his body weight, your body weight. You can utilize just the right moment in the footfall sequence, and enhance or increase whatever he's already doing naturally at that moment. So in the moment where he's already supporting the weight with the hind leg and flexing the hind leg, you could ask him to do just a little more of that or do it for a little bit longer. Whereas if you ask him to sit and flex and carry at the moment when he really needs to push and extend the joints, then you'd be fighting the laws of physics, right? And then of course, when we fight physics, we lose, right? So take advantage of physics, so to speak.
It either has a
Utilize
no
physics.
effect, a bad effect, or over time it can also make the horse unsound because they're trying to accommodate your request to bend the joints when they're not in a moment where they can bend well.
Exactly.
And so it creates a pressure in the hock that can over time create spavin, for example.
Or wind puffs in the lower leg and stuff. It's like two opposing forces that hit each other, right? When the joints are extending and your aid is telling them to flex.
But this is actually what that shouldn't scare you away from experimenting. This
Right.
should actually encourage you to experiment and to listen to the feedback from your horse, because your horse is giving you the feedback. If it has a good effect, then the timing is right. If it doesn't have a good effect, but you're doing it because this is the way you think you're supposed to do it, and you're just going on rote and doing it this way, even though it's not creating a good effect, or you're not sure if it is, or whatever, then it can be doing some damage. So listen to your horse and ask your horse, is there a better way I could do this? Experiment, try, ask by experimenting with varying it 3 different ways and seeing which way is better. And it's kind of like the game of hot and cold. You get some messages from the horse. Oh, this one worked maybe a little bit better. Maybe. So let me take that theme and follow that line of conversation with the horse, and then maybe find 2 that worked better there, and then follow those 2 further and develop it. And this is your dialogue. This is how you can use your horse to help you learn better and ride better.
So here Kathy Gallman says, could you give an indication of how often you use the half-halt? Well, I would use it when I need it. So when I feel
Sorry.
like...
That's such a non-answer.
No, it's fine.
I know, but I'm apologizing.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of the half-halt is to increase the flexion of the haunches, right? And transfer a little bit more weight to the hind leg. So whenever you feel like my horse is losing balance, for example, I'm cruising along, everything is good, and suddenly I feel like my horse is losing balance, he's leaning on the reins or whatever, getting fast, or as he loses balance, then I might have to give a half-halt to bring him back into balance, right? Or if there is a corner coming up and I feel like like with a car, you're cruising along at a certain speed, now a curve is coming, the curve is kind of tight, and at the speed you're going, you would fly off the road, right? Then you slow down, you downshift, step on the brake a little, so you're safe. And it's the same when you feel like there is a turn coming up that's a little too tight for the speed I'm going, for the stride length and the tempo, etc. Then you may have to half-halt a couple of times to reduce the stride length, make the horse sit a little bit more so you can turn the shoulders a little bit more tightly, that kind of thing, right? Then of course, when you want to ride down transitions, you may have to half-halt. We do it in 3 half-halts, like prepare, execute, like sit, and now do the down transition. So you can use it to alert the horse, or basically tell the horse, get ready, sit a little behind, because you will have to jump into action in a second here, whether you're trying to ride a half pass, or you're trying to do a flying change, or a corner, or whatever. So just gather the forces in a sense, right? Flex the joints so they're ready to move in any direction at any time, right? So that's why you can't say half-halt every 3rd stride or something like that, or half-halt once a minute or so. Some teachers, they do this, like you should half-halt at least every 3rd stride. But then it becomes mechanical, right? And then there is no more correlation between what the horse is doing.
What if the horse needed it on the 2nd stride? What if the horse didn't need it there? Do you still half-halt? Right. I remember I had a teacher that told me I needed to half-halt at every quarter of a volte, okay? But only at those points.
Whether he needs it or not. If you give aids that are not in correlation with what the horse is doing, it's like this I'll do it rigidly, always here and here and here, whether the horse needs it or not, the horse will end up tuning you out because it doesn't make sense.
And you're tuning the aid out yourself, in fact, because you're doing it by rote, regardless of whether it has an effect or not. In fact, you're not even listening for the effect. And what I really want to encourage you to do is to listen for the effect and really try to notice what any aid that you give, what effect does it have, and do you like that effect or not? Because a lot of people find that they're just doing what their instructor says, and the instructor, I'm sure, means well. Absolutely, there are no instructors trying to teach badly, but they're doing what their instructor has said to do, but they're not pausing to notice whether this is creating the desired effect. I'm not saying this is your case, but it happens a lot. You're just doing, because you want to be a good student, you're just doing what your instructor is saying, and you're not noticing what it's doing, even if it's having the right effect or not. You don't even know what the right effect might be. So, yeah.
Yeah, the aids are
Reflect.
always communication, which means you're asking the horse a question, or you're reminding him of something, or you're making a request, and then the horse responds, and then you need to respond to the response in some way, either by allowing the horse to continue, or maybe praising him for giving the right answer, or maybe coming back with rephrasing your question, you know, saying, well, this is sort of what I wanted, but not quite, right? Often the horses give you an answer that's partially correct or partially what you wanted, but partially not. So then you may have to say, well, let me rephrase that. Or, I didn't think you heard me. You ignored me, you know, let me, I meant, you know, for you to give me an answer here. So, you know, so it becomes a dialogue, right? But if you give these aids, you know, and with no regard for how the horse responds, then they tune you out.
It becomes
same thing with these, you know, driving aids every stride that we were taught as teenagers that don't make sense at all, because it's the aid that's so monotonous is like a dripping faucet, right? Some horses, you know, go nuts at first, you know, because it's so irritating, and then they ignore you, they tune you out. Right?
It's like when I was a kid, I had a friend whose parents had one of those big grandfather clocks in their house, and I went to spend a weekend with them. And when the first day, God, that clock drove me crazy. You know, it was so annoying because you always hear the tick tock, tick tock, and then it chimes at every intervals. I don't even remember, but by the end of the weekend, I didn't notice it at all anymore. I had completely tuned it out. And the horse does the same thing. You know, at first it might respond to your half halts, but if you give them by rote, you know, every couple strides or whatever, the horse is going to start to tune them out because they're not making any sense.
Exactly. Then it's like, well, they half halt whether I'm going fast or slow, whether I'm responding or not, right? It's like makes no difference.
Or, you know, or the horse wants to be efficient and save his energy too if he's smart. And so, you know, if he learns that, oh, this keeps happening regardless of whether I react to it or not, they'll stop reacting to it over time. This is how we desensitize horses too, and you can use that to your benefit. Or it can become something like this, where you're giving an aid, wanting an effect, but it's not creating the desired effect because you're doing it too monotonously. So, yeah, we have lots of comments and questions.
Yeah, no. So Vivian Dixon was saying it's been massive benefit to me to realize there's not just the correct way. Learn so much from experimenting. This also demystifies conflicting advice. It's not conflicting, it's another way.
That's exactly.
Very true. And like, for example, when you ride in a lesson, the teacher tells you something, you know, and you feel like that's not working, you can file it away, because maybe someday you will get to ride a horse where that works, right? It's just because it doesn't work right here and right now on this horse doesn't mean that it's never going to work, right?
It doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong.
It could even work on the horse you're riding, but
in a different context.
3 months from now, right? Or 6 months from now, because the horse changes.
Yes, right? Different context.
So that's why it's good, even if you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to use that right now because it's not helping. But who knows if.
But that's interesting. Let me stick it back here and refer back to it later.
A situation where it will help. Right? So Mandy Jones says, will you not confuse a young horse? I don't think so. If you do it with this dialogue attitude, like you give a certain aid, right? And you want to create a certain reaction in the horse. And the horse will either give that reaction or not. If you feel like, no, he has no idea what I'm talking about, then you could say, well, let me phrase it a different way. Let me use a slightly different aid.
You modify, and you're looking for a little bit more of the reaction you want.
Exactly. Or otherwise, it's like, let me explain that to you. Maybe I have to break it into smaller pieces, into smaller steps, right? When you're training a young horse, and but it's a dialogue. It's like you're asking a question, the horse answers you, right? And then if you don't get the answer that you were hoping for, then you can think about, well, how could I do this differently?
Right. This informs how you give the next aid.
Exactly.
Right. Either you do it the same way if it got the desired effect, or you want to just see, was that a fluke? Sometimes you do the same thing more than once just to see if you get the same result. That's okay. But if you're not getting the desired result, you don't keep doing the same thing just because you don't want to confuse the horse. At this point, the horse doesn't know what you're talking about anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, the experiments are not totally random, right?
Yeah.
But it's more like in science.
It's thoughtful.
you design an experiment, you know, and you want to know, you know, what the outcome is, or you design an experiment with a certain result in mind. I would like to get this, and based on what I know, I assume that these and these and these ingredients will kind of lead in that direction. Let me see if I'm right. Let me see if my hypothesis is right, right? And then you can modify it when you feel like, yeah, sort of, but not quite. Let me change certain things, you know, tinker a little with it. Right?
Like you can experiment with adding different degrees of closing the thighs as you give the half halt. So your first couple of half halts, you could give a couple to see, you know, get a baseline medium reaction, right? Mean reaction. And so give a couple of half halts with no thighs. Okay. Okay. Then you can pretty much assess the way the horse is going to respond to that, and then apply a little bit of thigh feel, just maybe just a little feeling of the thigh right at the moment that you give your half halt. Okay. Do that a couple times to assess kind of the reaction to that. And then you can give a little bit more the next time, maybe a bigger closure if the horse was okay with the other one. You know, bigger closure of the thighs, and assess that. And that would be a thoughtful experiment where you're taking one element and changing a variable, okay? And then assess that and go, oh, okay, my horse liked the thigh pressure. That's really interesting. What if I add more? You can add even more and find the limit that the horse doesn't like anymore or doesn't have a good effect on the horse. So then you understand the range within the horse will react. And then you can then play with elements of that. Like, what if I just use, I had a student that we went through a whole range of experimenting like this with. Try using just the very upper part of your thigh. Try using the lower part closer to your knee. Experiment. Try these different elements. Find out what your horse likes the best. Yeah. And that would be a thoughtful way of going through the experimentation. So it's not, like you said, it's not random. You're actually engaging in a dialogue with the horse, and the horse starts to actually become curious when you're doing this, because they notice that you're having this intimate conversation with them, and that you are taking their feedback into accordance, and you're then modifying accordingly. And they like this. They like this.
So here, Mariana Nyberg has a question. She says, during your courses, I've noticed that my horse wants a very strong support, always from the outside calf, in order to relax, independently on which rein we're going. I've now been wondering, is this truly about the forward support of my calf, or is this about me engaging my core more in order to be able to stay stable when having this uneven contact with legs on my horse? Is it just that he wants me to stay lighter in the saddle? I have earlier noticed that if someone says sit deeper, more weight into the hind leg, etc., he inverts more. Is this just about my horse being very sensitive in the back? And he has noticed that I keep myself better engaged when concentrating on my outside leg. Stirrup stepping seems to have a good response with my horse, but still struggling to get the timing right, as we have often too fast tempo and have to first use reins to get him to slow down, as heavier seat is not helping, at least. Yeah, when you stretch your outside leg back and down, it stabilizes your seat and anchors your seat, and it creates a little bit more torso muscle, core muscle engagement. I had that too, sometimes in certain phases in my riding. I felt too, I have to really stretch my outside leg back and down and touch with my calf, and then suddenly the horse goes on the bit and is round, right? And when I didn't have that, he was like maybe falling on the inside shoulder, dropping the back, inverting, and so on. And so there could be one aspect that your outside leg frames the outside hind, so it can't escape to the outside. But for me, it was always a grounding of my seat. You know, it's like when I bring that outside hip and leg back and stretch it, it's almost like I can touch the ground with my outside foot, and it's like an anchor in a way, and has a stabilizing, balancing effect.
Right. It's like in yoga, the warrior 1 and warrior 2 postures, that the back leg has this intense, amazing stretch all the way down to the outside knife edge of the foot. And that's sort of the same feeling of this stretch that you have of the outside leg that eventually, that we're working towards in our seats. Let me just say something, Mariana. I really love your curiosity and that you are asking the right questions. You know, I'm not even going to have an answer for you because your horse is only going to tell you, but I love the questions that you are asking. You're on the right track. Go keep following this. This is absolutely the way to go.
And yeah, it's interesting that your horse is a little sensitive in the back, so that sitting heavier, you know, is not going to work.
Great observation.
Yeah, so you
Great observation.
And yeah, this stretching of your legs tends to distribute the weight over a larger surface area, which makes you feel lighter to the horse.
What I can say
why he probably likes it.
Is that your horse will probably change over time again.
That too.
So he may need that support right now for whatever reason. I don't know. I can't have a conversation with your horse right now, so I have no idea why. But, and this isn't a typical response of everyone in the courses, but it's an interesting observation. I commend you for noticing it and giving your horse that support, and just notice that it will evolve. Nothing stays the same, even if we wanted to or don't. Nothing stays the same. So it will change over time. Either you will find a better way of supporting him in the way that he needs, or he will get to the point where he doesn't need quite that same support anymore. I built the cat out.
And yeah, if your horse tends to be too fast, you can use a combination of stirrup and rein to slow him down, right? With the stirrup pressure, you channel the weight, and also the weight of the horse's head and neck that comes through the rein. You channel that into the foot that's on the ground, and you can slow him down. The horses accept rein aids often a lot better when you combine them with a stirrup pressure than if you just give the rein aid. And they accept that stirrup plus rein often better than a seat aid, you know, heavier seat, especially if the back is sensitive. And that kind of answers Roberta's question. She says, my horse responds better to stirrup pressure since she's young, sensitive to too much seat pressure and rein pressure, and she's just learning the aids. Try to apply a stirrup pressure and then add a little rein to that. It often seems to explain the rein aids to the horse. They often really accept the rein a lot better when you add the stirrup pressure, whereas rein without stirrup, they might be a little irritated and, you know, resist a little bit, and then as soon as you add the stirrup, it goes through. It's a really interesting observation I've made. Mary Patterson says, I've learned so much more about how to get the best from my horse since following you guys. It's been a riding revelation. I now feel happy experimenting and believing in myself and knowing my horse. That's awesome.
Awesome. I'd love to hear that. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, the horse becomes your trainer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because the horse will let you know how he wants to be ridden. You know, if you ask the right questions and then, you know, develop a dialogue around his answers, you know, then the horse will show you, you know, how you need to sit, how you need to ask, and so on. It's really interesting. And Martha Gay says, at work, can I watch on replay this evening? They don't teach this here. Yes. No vocabulary word for it. Thank you for your wonderful knowledge share.
Absolutely, you can watch the replay. Yeah. And all of our videos, if you don't like watching on Facebook, I mean, those of you watching right now are on Facebook or Zoom, but we're putting them all on YouTube too. So you can watch it in multiple places.
Kendall Levin says, in my work, consideration must be given to each client when trying to give the best therapy or instruction for each one. This can change as each one's experiences of the day change. This seems the same for my horse. And I need to learn how to read this to instruct both of us. Very true.
Yes.
Great to feel permission to change depending on how I question and how he responds, rather than the same question over and over each time. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, horses are just humans too, right? So they you know, they feel differently on different days or different times of the day, and so you may have to do things differently. If you feel like, well, what I'm doing right now is not getting the right result, the horse isn't in a receptive mood, he doesn't understand what I'm trying to do, or ask what I'm trying to ask of him, etc., then feel free to change it and do it differently, or ask in a way that you haven't asked before. Everything is always fluid and a work in progress. Nothing is set in stone. You know, there's no owner's manual like for a computer or a car.
Right.
There is no cooking recipe like Shana's chocolate chip cookies that always turn out the same way.
And it's a relationship, right, between you and another being. And this relationship is not static. There's always these ups and downs and ins and outs, and it changes over time. It changes through the day. It changes with moods, with cycles, energy levels. All of these things factor in. So it becomes this organic being. This relationship becomes this organic thing that changes and reacts to everything in the environment, and reacts to both you and your horse. You know, the relationship is influenced by each of you and all of these other elements. So yeah, so just like dealing with people, it's the same thing. Dealing with the horses, it's the reactions are going to change.
Yeah, exactly. Just when you figured your horse out, it would be different.
Yes. Oh God, yes. Just when you think you've got this whole writing thing figured out. Yeah, get used to it.
So Christina Pikovic says, I've recently read about connecting half-halt to get the contact. That implies using different aids for different half-halts. Isn't basically every half-halt connecting in terms of bringing the horse into contact? A couple of things. You will have to modify the way you're half-halting depending on whether you want to slow down or shorten the stride or just transfer weight, or, you know, so the details, the technical details will have to vary depending on what you want to do, and of course also depending on how your horse responds at that moment, right? But half-halts are not really something you do to create contact, but you can only half-halt once the horse has contacted your hand, so to speak, right? So you have to send the horse from your leg to your seat, from your seat to the rein contact. Then you can close that energy circuit and half-halt.
I think the problem there is that many people use the word contact to describe different things.
Right.
Just like, you know,
Maybe.
yeah, collection, you know, is used in different ways to mean different things. So sometimes you have to define the word contact. You know, for us, contact is, well, go ahead.
No. It's a contact from back to front, right? The horse, it's an energy impulse that the hind legs send out that travels along the spine. And then if the rein length is neither too long nor too short, it arrives in your hand and can be recycled from there.
Contact is something the horse makes through the energy of the horse. It's part of the circle, of the energy and circle of the aids through the horse.
And you can also think of it slightly differently. Like if the purpose of the half-halt is to flex the hind leg, you have to bring the hind leg under your body first, right? So before you have something to half-halt with or on, or, you know, you need to bring the hind leg underneath you, right? That's the job of your leg, right? So that's why in the old Spanish riding school, they would say that the leg brings the horse to the seat brings the horse to your rein, and then you can start, you know, half-halting and sitting on the, even your weight cannot really, if you just half-halt without rein, just with your seat, you can't do that if the hind leg is somewhere out behind you, right? If the hind legs are still in the barn, it's nothing to half-halt against, right? So bring the hind leg underneath you and then sit on them, right? So leg, seat, rein, release. So that's also one way of little mantra to think about: leg, seat, rein, release, right? Bring the hind leg under the body.
As long as it's not formulaic.
Sit on it. Yeah, it's just sort of a general guideline, right?
Yeah.
The rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because not all horses step under the body with both hind legs, right? Some of them are out behind, some of them are off to the side.
Or step under equally well. I mean, they, you know.
Exactly. They may do it with the hind leg, but not with the other, and yeah.
Yeah.
And then the half-halt and then can close that energy circuit.
Yes.
You know, one good way of getting the circuit going is to enlarge a couple of strides when you're riding a circle, right? With your inside leg, bring the inside hind forward and out. You know, make the circle a little bit bigger by enlarging. That brings the horse into your outside rein, and then you could, if you need to, you can half-halt.
Yeah, circle of aids is a whole other topic that would be, it's a great topic. You know, actually, if you would like us to do one of these on the circle of aids, let me know, and we could do one on that because it's a great topic. I have a whole bunch more questions in here.
Okay, let's do
okay, so
questions.
Lucas says, it took me many years to realize that you can half halt without shortening the stride and just rebalance, recycle, and you can shorten the stride and rebalance towards the hindquarters. Slowing down doesn't rebalance. Slowing down and pushing the hind leg more under does change the balance. The horse mustn't shorten the neck or block the back or change the rhythm. If the half halt doesn't work, you need more leg and seat.
But sometimes you need to slow the tempo down if the horse is rushing, right? In that situation. And then, if the horse is rushing, he's on the forehand. And by slowing down, you enable him to rebalance and get the weight more into the hind leg. So there is a time and a place for the slowdown too. But you're right that slowing down in and of itself does not collect the horse, right? But it helps the horse who has lost balance and is kind of running after his balance.
Yes.
You allow him to regain his balance. Right?
When the horse has fallen on the forehand, they'll continue to get faster and faster and speed up because it's like they're stumbling. Like, have you ever tripped and then you take a couple quick steps, a couple more and a couple more to try to get your balance? That's sort of what's happening with the horse when they get too fast. They're on the forehand. They've lost their balance on the forehand. And so part of rebalancing the horse is going to be part of slowing the horse down. And it's the chicken or the egg, right? The horse slows down because we've rebalanced the horse. The horse rebalances because we've slowed the horse down.
That goes into the whole issue of balance and tempo. Right?
Yes.
There are horses that volunteer or offer a tempo that's too fast, right? So and every horse can only find his balance in a certain range of beats per minute, so to speak, strides per minute, right? If the horse's natural tempo is higher than that, you have to slow it down. Otherwise, he'll never balance himself. Other horses are too slow, right? They're below that optimal range, and you have to speed them up.
You have to activate the hind legs a little bit more, get them a little peppier.
Exactly. So you have to find which range of strides per minute works for the horse to balance himself, and you get in there. And when he leaves that range, you have to bring him back either by speeding up or slowing down. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the whole purpose of the half-halt that slows the tempo down. It's only really useful if the speed is too high, the tempo is too high, right? And the horse then pushes himself onto the forehand. Because if the tempo is too fast, then the hind leg won't reach far enough under the body. It'll step short. It will skip the flexing, carrying phase and go right into pushing, and then so the horse becomes a wheelbarrow.
But you made a valid point that just because the horse is slow doesn't mean the horse is in good balance or collected.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely valid point. Another thing you said is if the half halt doesn't work, you need more leg and seat. Yes and no. Sometimes you need to change how you're giving your half halt. Okay, sometimes you need more leg beforehand, not in the moment of the half halt, but beforehand to bring the legs, hind legs of the horse underneath to engage them so they're in a better position to be able to take the weight when you try to get the half halt. And the seat, yes, okay. Most riders need a better use of the seat. Maybe not necessarily more seat, like stronger sometimes, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's a better use of the seat though. And this, we get to over time. The seat is developed over time. It's a gradual process of educating the seat.
Sometimes you have to engage the density of your seat so that there's a better connection from the rein and the weight to the hind legs. If the body density is too low, right, then the rein aid gets stuck and the horse drops his back and aid won't go through. And if you increase that core density, suddenly your aid is actually transmitted to the hind legs. But sometimes, stuff happens. You ride along, you want to half-halt, and you feel that the half-halt gets stuck in the back or the hind legs block it, then you have to release. Maybe send the horse a little more forward. Maybe the hind leg wasn't far enough under the body at the moment when you were asking for the hind leg. So then, release, bring the hind leg under you. That's where you would use your leg, right? And then try again. I mean, that's sort of the reality, right? Not everything is always perfect. We don't get everything right all the time. Sometimes we choose a bad moment. Sometimes we don't prepare enough. Sometimes the horse is, for whatever reason, not in the right place with his hind legs. And then you half-halt, it gets stuck. You realize, bad moment, release. Maybe also, or you feel like I was sitting down too hard. Now I need to lighten the seat. use my leg to bring the hind leg under the body, so back comes up again. Now I can try sitting again on the hind legs, and so on. So it's like this, cycle of, every stride can be a little different, and then whatever aid was missing, you add that, whatever aid was too much, you back off a little bit with that. So it's like the actual blend of ingredients can change with every stride, right? So.
Yep. Georgina asks, what do you mean when your elbows are connected to your body? We actually went much more in depth into this on, what was that, Monday? Was that Monday?
Could be Monday,
on 3 tips to improve your rein contact. If you want the link to that, I can email you the link. Just email me or send me a Facebook message, either one. Not to the Ritter Dressage page, but to me personally. Or email me at ritterdressage@gmail.com, and I will send you the direct link to that video so you can watch it. But in brief, what do we mean when elbows are connected
to
your body?
It's like, again, it's sort of an increase of the density of your muscles around your lumbar spine, so it feels like the reins are attached to your pelvis and not to your shoulders, right? So
the elbows are not way over here or way in front of you. They're within a kind of bubble, magnetic bubble, if you think of the seat. They don't have to be clamped onto the side. For Thomas, his elbows actually reach his hip points. If I do that, I have to go like this because I have a longer body and shorter arms. So my elbows actually only reach the end of my ribs. Okay, so the same description doesn't work. I can't keep my elbows at my hips, but I keep them within this kind of magnetic realm. There's sometimes a little bit of air there. It's not that they're clamped on, but sometimes I do close them against my side, but they're never clamped. And the elbows are part of the seat and not part of the arm so much, or part of the rein contact. They're really part of the seat. They connect the aids, the rein aids, to the seat.
Right. Yeah. If you think
and if they're not within this realm, and you don't apply just a little bit of closing of the arm when you give a half halt, then it gets stuck in the arm. Then it just becomes this, like pull my arm. It just becomes here. But if I, do the same thing, if I've connected my seat to it, I've closed my arm a little bit towards my seat, and I've stabilized my torso a little bit by making my seat muscles a little denser. Okay, just to get a really general about how to use the seat. This connects then my elbow to my seat. It's like I create a stronger magnetism here. Okay, but go watch that because we go more in depth on Monday.
Yeah, if you think of your forearms as belonging to the pelvis and transmitting whatever contact the horse puts into the rein to your pelvis instead of to your shoulders, then that's sort of the basic idea. If the horse puts traction on the reins or leans on you, maybe even, you should feel this in your pelvis and lower back, not up in your shoulders, right? And then you can, if that, whatever the horse puts into the reins get transmitted to your pelvis, it can be passed on from your pelvis to the horse's hind legs. Whereas if whatever traction the horse puts on the reins goes up to your shoulders,
or gets stuck anywhere in your arm, and that's when you feel like, oh, I have so much weight in my arms, it's because you're not relaying this to the seat and letting the half halt rebalance the horse. So yeah, any rein aid actually needs to hand all of the responsibility. It's just a messenger. It hands all of the responsibility to the seat. It takes on nothing of its own. The arms have to be really lazy. Really lazy.
And you feel that where the reins connect, you feel it especially in moments when the horse leans on you, or when he tugs on you, or some horses have figured out that they can pull the reins out of the rider's hands when they root, like they push their head down really hard. And if that lifts you out of the saddle, then your elbows or your arms were connected to your shoulders, and then the horse can leverage you out of the saddle. Whereas if your elbows are connected to your hips and the horse tries to root, he will pull your pelvis forward and down in the saddle and half halt himself. But you just close your fingers.
As long as your pelvis is not tipped too much forward, because then it'll still pull you forward. So your pelvis has to be in the right position,
Mhm.
and then you keep the elbow connected to the seat, and then the horse tugs on you, and it just pulls you into the saddle a little bit more. The horse rebalances himself.
Right, exactly. He half-halts himself. You just
Mhm.
have to, at that moment, keep the integrity of the seat so you don't get pulled forward, and then you release again.
You're just
So,
there
yeah.
to let the message go through. You're just
Right.
handing the message from one, like the baton, from one to the other. You're just handing the baton to the seat. It's like, oh, this is for you. Message for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the seat says message for you to the hindquarters. So we have a ton more on here. So Dr. M. Sandra says, so when the horse's hind leg is under the rider's inside hip, the rider's hip is up or down. When the horse's hind leg is under the rider's inside hip, the rider's hip is up or down. It's up.
Well, the rider, rider's body comes down after the suspension phase in the trot. If you think of the trot, right, the horse lands, the rider's body is in a downward motion, but as the hind leg of the horse touches down, the hip goes up a little bit. So that's why that creates that little bump feeling, right? And it's
the beginning of this, like there's an up and down swing, right, in the back, and it's the hind leg touches down, and then as it starts to push, it pushes the hip up. So it's the beginning of that up phase. Yeah. So I have found the rider tells me how it feels subjectively. The pelvis seems to roll up and then sink down, such as the stepping exercises on stirrup creates thrust off the ground. Well put. Okay. Maxine Laurie says, my girlie likes the lifting half-halt. Lifting half-halt. Only found this out recently, went down many different routes for the half-halt before I found out what works for her. Yes. One of our teachers, Carl McCulka, used to teach this. To sit taller. To sit taller. And at first that totally boggled my brain because I didn't know at that point. I hadn't heard of that kind of half-halt. But it worked. And so I experimented with it to see, why does this work? And I noticed that it influences the pelvic floor. It influences the pelvic floor in a different way. And I noticed that on some horses, it created a super, super good effect. And these are the horses that tended to be a little bit more sensitive in the back and didn't like the down pressure of the pelvic floor. They preferred the upswing of the pelvic floor, which spreads the weight out more. So yeah, it works really well for some horses. Hold on, I'm trying to see who. Before I could tap on a name and it would tell me, I don't know, from Catherine probably, or Kathleen. I know, it won't show me now, it did before. Georgina, they talked about this. Oh yes, okay, she's answering Georgina. Georgina asks, so you never use a half-halt with just the rein? That explains a lot.
Yeah, any rein aid has to be backed up by your body mass, by your weight. Like one of my old teachers used to say, it's like when you write a check, you have to have enough money in the account, otherwise it bounces, right? And the balance in your account, that's your body weight. If your rein aids or reins are not connected to your seat, your weight, the horse will fight. Even if you have a light contact, you're not doing anything, the horse may refuse to go on the bit if there's not the connection from your seat and weight to the rein. And then if you apply an active rein aid without the connection to the seat, it will get stuck.
It's just a rein aid. It can get stuck then in just the head and neck of the horse. And this is what invites horses to then argue with the reins. And rider and horse are arguing, and this is never a good thing. Yeah,
that's a sad thing. If your rein is not connected to your body, then you're pulling on the reins, but you're not aiding with the reins, right? It's meaningless for the horse. They don't understand what you want. It makes no sense. And as soon as you connect the body weight to the rein, suddenly the horse understands, right? Suddenly they know what you're talking about. And
it creates the desired effect. Like if you're trying to create a shift of balance by just talking to just the head and neck with it, and it's getting stuck in the head and neck because you're not transferring it to the seat, then it doesn't make sense to the horse then. It's because it can't create the desired effect. But if you connect the rein, always give the rein aid with the seat, then it connects it. It informs the horse what to do with this rein aid, right? That the point is to shift the weight back. Yeah.
And you can even, if you can even experiment with this, when you half halt and it doesn't go through, you can think, well, how much body density, how much connection from my body weight to the rein did I have? And then try to repeat the aid with higher body density with a better connection from your weight to the rein. And then maybe it goes through and that's your answer. Then, wasn't using enough seat. And using the seat in the half halt is not necessarily sitting down hard and heavy. Sometimes it's just increasing the density, and so you have a better connection to the rein.
Sometimes it can be downward. Sometimes it's just increasing the density of the seat. It's like everything becomes a little bit thicker in a way,
Exactly.
in the seat. It's not, I never liked the bearing down analogy. Because this is all just downward pelvic floor, okay? And so you can use the pelvic floor downward, you can use the pelvic floor upward, that's the sitting taller, and you can also use it just kind of outward, okay? There's several different uses of the seat, and experiment with this, play with it, find what works for you and your horse.
Yeah, you could, increase the density around your lumbar spine and arrest the movement. Like you're not going up, you're not going down, you're just staying where you are for a moment, like you're switching your video to pause
like
for
Matrix.
a second. Yeah.
Like in the Matrix.
And then
like they're in midair.
Yeah. So that would be a seat aid too. It's just, you're exactly like the Matrix, like slow motion. Suddenly.
Just for a moment,
and
split moment.
You go with the movement.
Yeah.
And these
like
all have effects on
I always thought of it as kind of grabbing the moment for a split second. You grab it and then you let go of it. You grab as the moment travels through your moment, as the movement travels through your body. It's like you grab the movement for a moment and then you let go and let it continue on its merry way.
Right.
So, but you hold on to it for just a moment, and this suspends things for a moment, suspends your ability to be able to influence the horse a little bit more. You get a little bit more into the horse. Okay. Dr. Ensandro says freedom to ride. She well stated. Georgina says that is so refreshing to hear. Instructors don't generally encourage experimentation. And Dr. Ensandro says again, freedom to feel, freedom to be real with your riding. Yes, yes. Own your riding. It's yours. It's yours. There's no point in doing this if you're not fully in it. And this is a way to get fully in it. Okay. Dr. Ensandro says also to establish that horses on the aids, i.e. while leg yielding, will he answer the outside aids to go forward or run through the aids, putting horse through the paces to check out what horse understands? Maxine says, I love that you guys have given me permission to experiment and play with my horse in the aids. Yes, please do. Dr. Ensandro says, not surprising that the horse will begin to offer to do what you ask because they understand. Yes, exactly. And
one more thing on that note, like when any teacher describes like specific aids, right, that you should be giving, that's based on what works for them, based on their weight, their height, the length,
horses they've ridden.
Yeah, the length of their torso, arms, legs, the horses they've ridden, how big, how small they are.
Their experience thus far. And it's worth taking into account.
Right,
you should listen.
But if you're built a little differently, it may not work. Like we often have this,
I do this, I'm like, well, that's not what I do at all. Like he explains sometimes with the seat that he makes a capital D with, and I'm like, this does not work for me at all. But it works for his body, not for mine.
But for me, it's very hard to picture what it would like to have her body, right, and vice versa. I've never had that body, so it's very hard for me to visualize how would that work, how would that affect the horse, right? So I can only tell you how my body works and how that affects, and then I can try and give you ideas of questions you could ask and things you could experiment with, right? Because if I tell you do it exactly like I do it and you're built differently, then it will be a disaster.
Then no wonder you're going to get the wrong effect, right? Okay, Dr. Ensandro said, once they offer, let them demonstrate their knowledge of what they've learned. I love this dialogue. Yeah. And she says, yes, circle of aids, leg and seat reins. Yes. So glad you qualified the strides per minute and how effective it is to adjust tempo to reset balance by effective application of half halt. So Georgina says she missed Monday. Yes. Okay. Yeah. You can find it on Facebook too, but if you just want to make things easier, just email me. Dr. Ensandra, this says this session is a great philosophy and theology class. Theology.
My religion is the only right one.
Dressage theology.
I know.
Yeah, I love it.
We'll
Georgina
kill everybody
says,
who doesn't have the same religion.
oh, let's just not, okay? Let's just
that's
not.
how religion works. Right?
I know, that's how dressage works too, right? But let's all just say, no, I choose not to. Like, remember years ago, remember we heard about a student that she wrote a first or training level test, and she didn't canter.
Right, yeah.
She just did the canter portion in the trot, and she said afterwards, "Oh, we elected not to."
Yeah, the judge asked her what happened with the canter, right?
What
She said, "Well, we elected not to."
So let's just choose not to. Let's just choose not to kill each other for having different views on dressage. You know, but we can all coexist. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay. Georgina says, this is such amazing information, brilliant. And Dr. Ensandra says, rain contact, positive tension to elbow to draw energy into seat bones, bravo.
Yeah. It's a hard thing to really explain well because it's a feeling that you have and it may feel a little different to different people, right?
Yeah.
So, but you phrased it well. I think that captures it really well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the hard things that rain contact is like it's a whole body concept that involves your whole body and the horse's whole body, and it's a feel that it's sophisticated, has a lot of different aspects to it, right? And it's hard to capture the essence really well.
Yes.
You know, so that's why it's hard to explain. That's why it's a hard thing to learn. It's a hard thing to teach, right?
But so, you can.
It's possible. Just work.
And experimentation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Being curious, cultivating your curiosity, experimentation, thinking about it. Experimenting with thinking differently too about things. It's not just experimenting with doing different things, but experimenting with thinking differently about it, thinking a little outside the box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have a couple of good questions here. So Kathy Gallman says, does a half-halt also create more impulsion in your opinion? It can if you do it just right. If you, it's like, think of a basketball that you're dribbling, right? If you press it into the ground and let go, it bounces back. If you press in the right rhythm, in the right intensity, it bounces a little higher every time. And you can create the same effect if you create just the right alternation between flexing the hind legs and releasing again. They will bounce back more and more. And you can do this with just the right sequence of exercises, and you can do it with your seat and aids and half-halts.
I was going to say, especially when you combine it with movements and or exercises, it can be really effective because it helps you, the half-halt combined with these things helps you to build power. It's like you're building like pressure in a pressure cooker. Okay, and then like you want to make a really good extension across your diagonal, you can build the pressure beforehand through a sequence of exercises or movements, or sometimes just through writing your corner very precisely a certain way so that you're really transferring weight into the hindquarters, building some power, build it, and then you let it go.
Yeah, that's the paradoxical thing. When you have a horse that doesn't go forward enough, right? Then the trainers usually say drive more, ride him forward.
Go forward!
And the student works really hard, gets hot and sweaty, and the horse never goes any faster.
And the horse just goes, or might go faster, but on the forehand.
But not more forward, exactly. So, and with the horses that are not forward enough, their hind leg joints are usually fairly open, fairly extended. So there is not much room for them to extend and push more, right? So they can't even go forward.
Where they're pushing all they can.
Exactly. So before the horse can push, which is an extension of the joints, you have to flex them, right? So sometimes you have to actually take that little horse that's not going forward enough, bring the hind legs under the body, flex them more, in a sense, create a degree of collection. Now suddenly there is space for the hind leg joints to extend, plus the horse will feel like, well, this is starting to be like real work here. So I'd like to extend my joints because then I'll be more comfortable again, right? So you create a desire to go forward. All of a sudden the horse wants to go forward, right? And you're not having to nag every step of the way, right? So, and that's one area where the half halts at the right moment and the right combination of exercises will create just enough flexion of the haunches so the horse wants to go forward, and then you have more impulsion, you have more honest forward, right? The horse now wants to move, you know, rather than you have to push and nag all the time, right? And then Ian Montgomery says, do you think each horse has its own individual tempo where it suits him like runners, and that's where they find balance?
Yes.
Absolutely, that's really important.
They have a range. They have a range of tempo that they work best within.
But as you can imagine, for a Haflinger, that's different than for the Hanoverian, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or for the Lipizan, it's different than for the Shetland pony. So if you just picture very
or
different...
the Icelandic.
Yeah, exactly. When you picture very different types of horses, like the extremes, then it makes sense that obviously, you know, your Icelandic will not have the same trot as a Hanoverian. It will always be a different tempo.
No matter what you do, no matter how well you ride.
Exactly, yeah. Because they're built differently, right? They have little different mechanics and stuff. So, and it's our job as riders to find out what is the tempo in which the horse can balance himself best. Find that horse's best tempo. And there's a range that the horse works well within, and then a smaller range that the horse works absolute best in. And I think even Dupaty de Clam said that in 1777 already. He figured that out and said that every horse has his own cadence, right? And our job as riders is to find what that cadence is and cultivate it, refine it, but not to change it, right? And very often people have these ideas of this is what the working trot should look like. Yeah. And then they get maybe a student with a horse that has a very different kind of trot. And they tell them, go forward, more forward, more forward.
Inexperience. It's just inexperience on that instructor or trainer's part. You know, they just haven't reached that point yet where they've realized this. So you really have to find out what is the right range of strides per minute where this horse can find his balance. And for some horses, it may be slower than you are comfortable with because we're conditioned a certain way, right? This doesn't feel forward enough. But if I ride more forward, the horse feels hard and stiff and he falls on the forehand. And then it's weird to have to ride slower, right? Or the other way around, you know, maybe it's a little faster than somebody's comfortable with, right? Especially when people are a little fearful, you know, and they have a horse that needs a bigger trot, that needs a certain tempo, you know, and they would be much more comfortable with a slower trot and smaller strides, right? Because they're afraid of the power, right? So then they have to kind of get over themselves and just take that leap of faith and hope it's going to be okay and allow the horse to go a little bit more. Little quicker tempo, a little longer strides, you know, depending on the horse. Gradually push your comfort level. You know, if that's you, then you just do it bit by bit. You don't just throw yourself into the deep end of the pool. You do it bit by bit. Gradually getting more and more comfortable with a bigger trot, more energy, bigger energy, so on. Yeah. Yeah, so that's really important to find the right tempo. Right? So Mandy Jones was saying, I feel much more relaxed that I can experiment, not one size fits all. Yes. Vivian Dixon, there's a new revelation, trainers different sizes, never thought about that, makes sense, yeah. And especially if you have like a tall man instructing a small woman, you know, there is just no way that the woman can ride exactly like the trainer. I mean, she can ride as well and as effectively, but it'll be different. The horses can go similarly, you know, you can produce, make it so that they can each ride their horses, so the horses will go pretty much the same way. If they're similar types and so on, of course, not an Icelandic and a Hanoverian, you get my point. But the way they're going to use their seats and perhaps give their aids is going to be slightly different because their bodies are very different. Yeah, and they may have to engage different muscles and release different muscles. Yeah, they may have to use their torso in a different way. They're going to have different challenges, and, different strengths. Yeah, for example, if you have a tall rider with a certain weight on a small horse, they may have to try to sit as lightly as they can and be very careful with their upper body and everything else, right? Small rider on a big, strong, heavy horse may have to use all the weight they can get. They may even pack some extra weights into the saddlebags. You can't use the weight then, though. That's... I know, just kidding. But you know what I mean, right? So a small rider on a big horse may feel like I have to sit down really hard, otherwise my horse doesn't realize I'm there, right? And someone my size on a smaller horse may feel like, oh, I have to be really careful, sit like on eggshells and be really, you know, otherwise I'll break my horse in two if I sit down, you know. So then the horse goes, you know. Kissing spine disease, you know. Yeah, so that's something always
also, like when you take lessons, maybe, and the teacher gives you seat advice, maybe take into consideration, so how is that teacher built? What horses do they ride? And how am I built? And what is my horse built like? Does that make sense? Or is that maybe not realistic? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, you know, take into account then when they tell you to try something, maybe try it, because you never know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, even if it's based on, like, if he tells me, you know, try this, you know, I'm going to try it. You know, even though his body is, I know by now his body is very different, but he has good suggestions. So
sometimes.
So I'm going to try it. And then, you know, and if it doesn't go quite right, I'm going to very quickly modify it for my body, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can try everything once. Yeah, it's, as you see, it's a differentiated subject with lots of little moving parts and nuances. Exactly. Yeah, so it's always much more involved than we like to believe sometimes.
Than making cookies.
Right. That's true.
But it's so much more interesting too. Yeah. Always more to learn, always more to discover, always more to explore.
It's a lifelong project.
That's where it becomes art. You know, there's so much you can express within it by exploring these different little nooks and crannies. It's so interesting.
Yeah, there's no end to it. You'll never reach the end, you know. And just when you think you understand how it works, things change. You discover something new that realizes, oh, there's more to it. Unless
you're our daughter, who at 5 years old says, I know how to ride. I don't need lessons. I know how to ride.
Yeah, she said something like, I know everything about horses and riding. So I told her I would take lessons from her. Because
I know.
We don't know everything. I know. You have to have the self-confidence of a 5-year-old.
I know. So funny. So are we out of questions?
Pretty much, yeah. We've exhausted everyone.
Yeah. Dr. Ensendra says, haha, y'all are precious. So are y'all. So are you, all of you. Yeah. And thank you guys so much for your generosity of your time and knowledge. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up with your questions, your comments, your feedback, your problems. Those of you that shared, you know, it's a vulnerable thing, you know, to share, you know, that I don't really know what the half-halt is, or I think I've been doing it wrong, you know. That's scary to say out loud in a public forum, and this is rather public, and I commend you. Thank you all of you who were willing to do that.